Hi everybody, my name is John Hughes and I'm the music director of the Chicago Master Singers. Welcome to another session of CMS University. We're glad you're here. I want to start by just telling you a little bit about our organization. We're a group of about 100 audition singers from across the Chicagoland area that gather each Monday evening to pursue the highest level of choral excellence. Now obviously we can't meet right now given the current pandemic, but we can be together through these live streams. And I'm really glad that you're here tonight. Whether you're a member of CMS or someone in the local area who is maybe checking us out, or you're tuning in from farther away through the wonders of the internet, I'm just happy that you're here and I'm really excited about this project. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is that if you're watching this live stream, it is live. It is happening right now at 7:03 p.m. on August 31st, 2020. So that means that we can interact with each other and you can interact with me. So if you want to look on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat window, which I can see is getting some use already, and that's great. So a couple little housekeeping things about the chat. First of all, in order to participate, you have to be logged in to YouTube. So take a second, log in, and then you'll be able to type in and everything. Regardless of whether you're logged in or not, you'll be able to see the chat and all the comments, but in order to participate, you do need to log in. The other thing is that I will, from time to time tonight, check in on the chat and see how it's going. At that point, if I see a question that's directed to me, I can put it on the screen and try and answer it to the best of my ability. I just ask that you start your question with 4 question marks, 1, 2, 3, 4. That way it can kind of quickly catch my eye and I can see that that question's for me and maybe the other ones are for other people. So we're glad you're here. Let's dig into our topic for tonight. Now, last week we spent our time together talking about the Mozart Requiem, all the scandal and intrigue surrounding it. And you'll remember here that Mozart died on December 5th, 1791. And so this is a painting of what happened on December 4th, the day before he died, when he supposedly kind of supervised this read-through of his Requiem, which was incomplete, right? He never finished it before he passed. So that's the Mozart Requiem, and if you are tuning in, you can always go back. All the sessions are recorded, so you can go back and watch last week's session if you're interested in learning that backstory. But tonight, we're going to talk all about the Requiem genre, and the Requiems that came before the Mozart setting, and then ones that came after it. And so basically tonight, we're going to do a whirlwind tour of many Requiems where I'll talk a little bit about the composer, I'll talk a little bit about the Requiem, and then we'll listen to a movement. And I think this will be kind of interesting since the Mozart Requiem is fresh in our memory from last week to kind of see how it fits into the genre as a whole, how it might be similar to other movements or other settings, and how it might differ as well. So our first Requiem tonight is by Johannes Ockeghem. Ockeghem lived a long time ago and died in 1497, so in a very different world than where we live today. He was born in what is modern-day Belgium. He's really kind of what we would call part of the Franco-Flemish school of the Renaissance. We believe that he studied with Binchois, who was an important composer before him, and that he taught Josquin, who's probably the most influential Franco-Flemish composer of this period. And there's some similarities between Ockeghem and Josquin that I will talk about later on. Like many composers at the time, he studied and worked in Italy, and then he returned and worked for the French royal court, where he served 3 consecutive French kings. So a very noted person in his lifetime. So his Requiem was written in 1461, and this is the earliest extant polyphonic setting. So that means that we believe that there were maybe other polyphonic settings of the Requiem Mass before Ockeghem's, primarily the Dufay setting, but we don't have any copies of that. It's all lost to history. Now maybe someone will find it in an archive one day and prove that it was Dufay's setting, and then Ockegham's would no longer be the earliest one that we have. But for now, it's the earliest one. And this is unaccompanied polyphony, so no instruments here. We believe that he wrote it in 1461 for the death of King Charles VII, and that the piece was likely performed again when Louis VI died in 1483. Now, some of the interesting things about the Ockeghem Requiem is that it incorporates 2 Gregorian chants throughout, and you'll see that in a minute when we listen to the recording. He's borrowing material and writing freely composed material around it. And one of the really interesting things to note about Ockeghem and his music is that he really changes the music at each line of text break. And this is something that was relatively new. If you've listened to any earlier music by someone like Guillaume Michaud of the Notre Dame School of Polyphony, you'll notice that it's very florid, right? You can't understand the words. It's all melismatic. It's very, very strange sounding to our modern ears. But one thing that Ockeghem did was really, at each line of text, he changes the music so that it kind of demarcates the text in a very clear way. And this is something that Josquin, his most famous student, also did. Josquin's most famous piece probably is his Ave Maria. And if you know that piece, every line he switches, it'll be a soprano and alto duet. At the next line of text, then it'll go to full chorus, and then it'll go to an alto tenor bass trio. And so each line is really separated. And I think that's something that we can trace back to Josquin studying with Ockeghem. Now, tonight we're going to listen to the Kyrie movement of the Ockeghem Requiem. And here you'll see the chant is in the top voice. And it starts with a very simple ascending line from F, G, A, and B flat. So you'll see that in each section, the top voice starts with those 4 pitches. You'll also notice the changing texture with each line of text. So it's very clear. Now, one thing, those of you who might have perfect pitch, in this video, you'll notice that it has a score going and it's following along. You'll notice that the score is not the pitch that the singers are performing it at. And this is fairly common with Renaissance music, that people kind of modulate it to fit whatever voices they have. But this is lower. It's between a diminished fifth and a perfect fifth lower. It's not exactly a clean interval. But this is very common and emblematic of Ockeghem, that he wrote for very low voices. And we think he must have had those singers at his time. So this might actually be more authentic in a way. So let's take a minute. We won't listen to every part of every movement because we'd be here all night. So we'll kind of trim these a little bit for you. But I am excited. I spent a long time picking the recordings of the requiems that we're going to listen to because I think they're interesting for lots of different reasons. All right. So without any further ado, let's listen to a little bit of the Kyrie movement of the Ockeghem Requiem. Hang on one second. I don't know why we're not hearing it. Let me try it just one more time. I'm sorry for this. We upgraded to YouTube Premiere so that we no longer had ads, but now I'm not hearing it, even though I just tested it. So let me try one more time. Okay, I think I've got it. My apologies. Thanks for sitting tight. Here we go. All right, so I'm seeing lots of comments here that you can't hear it, which is frustrating because I tested this earlier. But one thing to just bear in mind is that there is a little bit of a delay. There's about a minute of a delay between what I'm doing and what you're seeing. It's just the latency factor of live streaming. So I will try my best to fix this, but I don't know if you can hear actually, or if it's still on the delay. So let's go forward, and I can share. I have a YouTube playlist of all these videos. So if we continue to have technical problems, I can share that YouTube playlist with you, and then you can go back on your own time and listen to them. But I won't make you sit and audiate music this whole evening. So we have a plan B if this doesn't work. But let's get before. Let me just see one thing here. It says, I could hear it before you said, now I've got it. That's interesting. Well, we'll continue on and see how this goes. All right, then we're going to skip a huge chunk of time. We're going to skip over Mozart and now go back to Berlioz, 19th century master, right? So he initially was very interested in medicine and actually left his university studies of medicine to pursue composition, and eventually got into the Paris Conservatory, where he really blossomed. Now, in the 1840s, he wrote a treatise on orchestration, which is still highly revered in the field of music today. And by a treatise of orchestration, what I mean is he wrote a book talking about how to write for instruments, how to combine them nicely so that they work well and you get all these magnificent orchestral colors, right? So that's really what Berlioz is known for, is just this really good ability to write for orchestra. And also he's known for scale. So his Requiem was written in 1836. It was actually commissioned by the state government to commemorate those lost in the 1830 revolution. And Berlioz, unlike Ockeghem or even Mozart, Berlioz really was not interested in creating a liturgical piece, meaning a piece meant to be performed in a church service. he took this opportunity to really write a musical drama, and he really blew it out, right? So the title of this piece, Grand Mass, Great Mass, is no exaggeration, and here's why. The forces that are required to do the Berlioz Requiem are really outstanding. I can think of no other, maybe the Mahler choral symphonies, but it's really singular in its scale. So we have a primary orchestra, which is rather large. You'll notice it has 8 pairs of timpani for 10 players. How many horns are there? 12 horns, right? It's just a humongous orchestra. And then he has kind of 4 brass bands in each corner of the church. So when he wrote this piece, he requested an orchestra of 190 and a chorus of 210, and even said that that it could be more at later performances, that he would love to have it be as big as possible. So this kind of gives you a sense of the scale of this piece. And it's one of the reasons we don't really hear this piece performed very often. I once heard a concert version of his opera La Troyenne at Tanglewood, and I mean, that was equally just huge. And you just don't often hear his music performed live just because of the cost. But it's a really interesting piece. Now, there are just some kind of interesting things to note about the Berlioz Requiem. The first thing is that he, again, is trying to heighten the musical drama. So he omits text, he repeats text, he adds text, and almost like a libretto, right? He's trying to get the most out of the Requiem text as possible. So that's one interesting thing. The other thing is, considering how many forces he had at his disposal, he doesn't use them all the time. It's kind of interesting. So he has 190 in the orchestra, 210 in the choir, and he writes no alto part. So the piece is for STB choir. So it's a 3-part piece in a way. And there's only one soloist, a tenor soloist, who only sings on one movement. He doesn't use the kind of the standard quartet of soloists. He only uses a tenor, and that's it, only one movement, and says, if you can't find a tenor soloist, just have 10 tenors from the choir go up and sing it. So kind of an interesting decision there. The other thing is that one of the movements is for unaccompanied choir, right? So he doesn't even use this huge orchestra the whole time. So it kind of a quirky piece in that way, but it's one of the things that makes it kind of its charm. So let's try YouTube again, and if we have a problem, I'll try and figure it out. But let's try it, because I picked this really interesting recording here of the Dies Irae movement, and this will give you a good sense of the scope. You'll see the offstage brass bands. You'll hear some of the timpani. Not all 8 are playing at this movement, but I think 4 are playing here. So you'll get a sense of the grandeur. And this is conducted by Dudamel in Paris. And I think he kind of fits this piece well because it's so exuberant. So let me switch over, and hopefully we can get the sound to work this time. Okay, I don't know what's going on because I see some comments saying that I have to switch the input. I don't know why it's not working. I apologize. I've tested it, but it's not working. So I'll just skip the recordings for tonight, and I'll figure it out for next week. I see some comments saying, the input you have to switch. It is switched, so I don't know why it's not working. But I'm hearing it. I'm sorry. I got a thumbs down. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But we'll go on, and I'll just skip the videos, and we'll send out an email with all the links so you can check them out afterwards. Okay? So please stick with me because I can still make this interesting and worth your time, I think. All right, let's go to the Verdi Requiem. A lot of us know and love this piece, in particular the very famous Dies Irae movement. So Verdi, an Italian composer of the 19th century, said he's got a very good start in music at a young age. So at age 9, he became organist at his local church. And in 1842, as a fairly young person, his opera Nabucco premiered at La Scala to great success. He did very well, and his career was off and running then. Verdi was very important to the Italian pride, and he modeled himself on other Italian composers such as Rossini and Donizetti, and really made his melody be prominent. And this is really in contrast to contemporaries like Wagner, who aren't necessarily known for writing just these very tuneful melodies. But Verdi, that was very important to him. Again, he was very interested in the Italian unification movement. So you have to remember at this time, Verdi, or Italy at the time, was really a collection of city-states. It wasn't one nation. It was kind of loosely connected, but the dialects were very different, and it wasn't, the culture was very kind of specific to that area. And Verdi very much helped unify the country as a whole, and through his music. And he actually became kind of a celebrity spokesman for the nationhood movement. So kind of an interesting person. And it's no surprise then that he wanted to honor other great Italian luminaries of his time with a Requiem setting. So he originally wanted to write one to commemorate Rossini and Alessandro Mazzoni, who was kind of the great literary figure at the time. So his idea was to write a Messa per Rossini, which is like a mass for Rossini, and they would take the 12 movements of the Requiem and divide it between 12 composers. So Verdi reached out to 11 friends and said, let's each write a movement and to honor this great composer of Italy. And it kind of fell apart, right? Verdi wrote the Liberame movement, but nothing happened after that. So he abandoned the project for about 5 years, and then decided he was going to complete the Requiem on his own, and that he would then take that Liberame movement, and he developed it more and wrote the other 11 movements, and that's how we get the Verdi Requiem that we know and love. Now, similar to Berlioz, this piece really kind of draws from some operatic traditions, and I think very successfully in this case. So it's very much through composed. Unlike other movements where it's very kind of much bookended at the end of each movement or series of movements, there's a pause. This really kind of flows between movements, just like music in an opera flows between scenes. And I think that that's a really important thing. You also see a virtuosic use of the four soloists. So unlike Berlioz, who had that one, who always only sings in one movement, Verdi very much relies on the four soloists to propel the narrative forward. And at times, the soloists almost dominate the choir, right? It's almost like the soloists are the ones on stage with an opera chorus, right? So it's a very interesting approach to the piece. And again, I think you're going to see throughout this evening kind of a movement away from a liturgical purpose and into more concert purposes. Now, we were going to listen to the Lacrimosa movement, which I intentionally chose because to me, when I think of the Verdi Requiem, like many of you do, I'm assuming you think of the Dies Irae movement, which is so famous. Even if you can't hear it in your head right now, if you Google it quickly, you'd immediately recognize it. It's been used in a lot of different scenes. It's very famous, especially with the bass drums. So the Lacrimosa is, remember, that's part of this longer Dies Irae sequence. And the Lacrimosa is the final movement of the Dies Irae sequence. And this setting that Verdi uses is so serene and beautiful. And I think it really, in my mind, it softens my view of the piece, which I can sometimes think is like, it can be viewed as like bombastic at times if you don't really know the whole scope of the piece. One other thing about this is that the theme actually comes from a duet from the Verdi opera Don Carlos that he abandoned before he completed it. So like any good composer, Verdi kind of recycled his music. So that's a little bit about that. This is also kind of the only movement I chose it because it really kind of, the chorus and the soloists are really on equal footing in this movement. So it's kind of an interesting piece. So that's a little bit about the Verdi Requiem. All right, let's talk about the Fauré Requiem, which is the one exception to the progression of the Requiem into more of a concert piece than a liturgical piece. In my mind, the Fauré Requiem is very much liturgical. He wrote it to be performed in a church service, and we know he performed it several times throughout his career. So I think this piece is the exception to the rule in a way. Now, Fauré is rocking that awesome mustache. I think it's one of the greatest mustaches in music. He was French through and through, and you hear that in his music. He studied with the incomparable Saint-Saëns, and then was a professor and later the director of the Paris Conservatory, where he taught some very, very successful students, including Nadia Boulanger and Maurice Ravel. Now, Boulanger, of course, went on to teach many, many generations of composers. And so Fauré, has this ripple effect throughout many of Boulanger's students as well. Now, his Requiem was written in 1888. So kind of if you look back at his dates, toward the end of his life, in the latter third, Fauré focuses very much on comfort. And in contrast to Mozart's and Verdi's depictions of the Dies Irae, which are kind of scary and fiery depictions, Fauré's is very comforting. In fact, he actually omits the entire Dies Irae sequence. He only ends, he does include, and I'll show you, I have my score here, he does have the Liberame movement in here, but it's very kind of pensive, and it's not scary in the sense that some of the other ones are. So his focus is much more on comfort. And here's a quote that Fauré said, "But that is how I feel about death, as a happy deliverance, a yearning for the happiness of the beyond, rather than as a distressing transition." So he's very much soothing those who are facing death, and I think that's one of the reasons that this piece is so beloved in the choral community to this day. Now, we were going to listen to the In Paradisum movement, which is the final movement of the Fauré Requiem, and I picked this recording of the King's College, Cambridge singing, and I think it's just really kind of captures Fauré's ideas because it's so pure, and it really captures like the sincerity and sweetness of the boys' voices really capture, I think, what Fauré was going for. I'm going to just take a minute here and look at the chat, and I see one here from Linda. Let me see if I can get it up on the chat here. Okay, it says, "Did Boulanger become an artist after composing music, or are they two different women?" I'm not sure. I know that there was Lily Boulanger and Nadia Boulanger. Nadia is the one I think of more as a musician, but I think both were involved in music and art. So you stumped me. I'm sorry that I can't give you a more clear answer, but I know there were two Boulangers, and they were very active in Paris in their lives, and very much had a lot of influence in the kind of the cultural life. Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions in the chat? Send us the link. I will send you the link afterwards. I'm sorry, I don't want to take the time to do that right now. Rick is saying that Boulanger was both a composer and a painter, so that's great. All right, let's keep going. Brahms. Okay, so let's talk about Brahms. I think a lot of us choral geeks love the Brahms Requiem, but I learned a lot about it. I've sung it 2 or 3 times and conducted parts of it that I didn't learn, and I will do my best to share it with you because I think it's kind of interesting. Brahms is an interesting person just in general. Here's a picture of him, kind of probably about middle-aged, composer here at the time, and that's really when he wrote his Requiem. For some reason, I just kind of assume that people write their Requiems kind of toward the end of their life, but that wasn't really true of Brahms. He wrote it kind of middle-aged. He was a very successful composer and conductor in his life. I know many of us today think of we think of Brahms as a composer primarily, but really a lot of his income when he was alive came from conducting. So he conducted the Hamburg Women's Choir for a while, as well as the Vienna Sing Academy, which is the kind of a similar group to CMS in a way, in that they perform kind of large choral orchestral works. So he was very active as a conductor in his career, and I think you actually can see that in his music, in that his scores are so kind of fastidiously marked with lots of articulation, and I think he really thought like a conductor would, and so when he was composing, he really wanted to be as specific as possible about the sound that he wanted. Now, Brahms was also a scholar, and we know that he was a active collector of scores and studied a lot of earlier German Lutheran composers, in particular Heinrich Schütz, who wrote a piece in 1635 called Musikalische Exequien, which is a piece that was commissioned for someone's funeral. And we know that Brahms studied this piece and that it may have even influenced his Requiem a little bit as well. So, Ein Deutsches Requiem, written in 1868, Brahms wrote this in memory of Robert Schumann, his mentor and friend, as well as Brahms's mother. So this is a very personal piece to him. We know it took him a long time to write it, and that he would kind of put it down and come back to it. So this was a really meaningful piece to him. Now there's just like this very interesting word in the middle of the title, right? Deutsches. And there's a little bit of, we don't understand exactly what Brahms means by that at first. So Deutsches could mean German, right? This is, first of all, Brahms does not set the Latin Requiem text. Rather, he uses German language and exclusively passages from the Bible. So there's a little bit of thought, well, he means that it's because it's in German. This could also be kind of a nod to Luther, who wrote the Deutsches Mass, right? The German Mass, which was really a landmark moment in the development of Christianity, because we see now the elements of Lutheranism enacted, right? The vernacular language and the kind of importance of the Bible, right? So maybe Brahms is echoing Luther a little bit. I think the third explanation for this, which is the most convincing in my mind, is that Deutsches means almost human, right? This is a human requiem. It really emphasizes two themes throughout the piece. The first is that it's comfort for those left behind. So it's, again, kind of like Fauré, Brahms isn't interested in dramatizing fear and judgment. Instead, he's really more interested in comforting not those about to die, but those left behind. I think the other thing that is really emphasized in the Brahms Requiem is this kind of release of putting down of life's woes at the end, and kind of focuses on that kind of moment of denouement versus a physical resurrection. Okay, so then there becomes this question of, is this piece liturgical or not? How is it best understood? As a concert piece, or is it liturgical? Is it a religious piece even? Now, we know it was premiered in April of 1868, which was Good Friday, April 10th of that year. And it was performed in a church. So we know that was where it was premiered. But it's interesting because Brahms' libretto, which he assembled, does not mention Jesus Christ at all, which on Good Friday is kind of interesting, right? That he never, it's kind of like the main guy on Good Friday, right? And Brahms doesn't mention Christ at all. And I think really what Brahms is doing in his Requiem is expressing more of how he feels about death rather than kind of fulfilling a liturgical function of, I've got to set this for this church choir to sing on Good Friday. It's kind of a very romantic period idea, right, of the composer as this kind of sullen genius trying to struggle with his self to express himself, right? And I think that's really how Brahms' Requiem is best understood. Now, Brahms, the person who kind of prepared the choir for the premiere, kind of challenged Brahms on this and said, don't you think that maybe we should mention Jesus a little bit here? And Brahms wrote back and said, as far as the text is concerned, I confess that I would gladly omit even the word German and instead use human. Also, with my best knowledge and will, I would dispense with places like John 3:16, right? That's it's kind of the crux of the New Testament, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Again, so here we see Brahms really kind of eschewing kind of church dogma and teaching of a physical resurrection through the belief in Jesus Christ, and rather focusing more on expressing his own ideas. He goes on to say, on the other hand, I have one thing or another because I'm a musician, because I needed it, and because with my venerable authors, I can't delete or dispute anything. So I'm going to include some stuff because you want me to, but I don't necessarily feel like it's important to me. So Brahms' Requiem is a very interesting piece. Let's talk about the second movement, which is the one we were going to listen to, which is Denn alles Fleisch es ist wie Gras. So then all flesh, it is but grass. This is, again, the second movement, and it combines texts from both the New and Old Testament here. The first section, it's very much in two sections, right? So the first section is, for all flesh is like grass, the grass is withered, and the flower has fallen away. The second movement becomes, a very German Lutheran understanding, right? It says, aber, and there's this big moment, and it says, the word of the Lord, so aber means but the word of the Lord endures forever, right? And then it becomes this I always picture like beer steins on the Die Erlöseten des Herrn, right? It's very exciting, and it feels just like you should be at Oktoberfest during that. And it's just a sense of joy that comes from the kind of the primacy of the gospel, right? And so that is a very, even though Brahms might not have identified with Christ in this piece, his understanding of the kind of primacy of the word is very much part of his time. And so we kind of see the second half of this movement, it really transitions away from this dirge of the first part, that all flesh is like grass, and really it becomes joyful of this idea of eternal rest. So I want to just quickly address this. I'll put you up here. Evan says, can you show us the score for a sec? My score is all the way across the room, so I don't want to do that right now. I'm sorry. I know that this is not ideal, but I'm just trying my best. And again, I'll send out the link to the playlist as soon as we're done, and we'll get that to you, and then you can look at it. Okay, and you'll know exactly the moment in this movement that I'm talking about then. Okay, let me see if there are any other chat questions. I think we're good. Okay, let's go to the final Requiem that we're going to talk about tonight is by Dale Trumbore. Now, this is kind of an extension in a way, of the Brahms Requiem. So Dale is living in LA right now. She earned a master's degree in composition from USC with Morton Lauridsen as her primary teacher. So kind of a cool connection there. And she is really at the forefront of choral music today. Her music has been performed by the LA Master Chorale, the Pacific Chorale, the Singers in Minnesota. And so some of the top groups are performing and commissioning her music today. And she, I don't know if you realize this, but like Southern California is really a hotbed of choral music. They have some of the best composers live there. Some of the best performers and college programs are in Southern California now. So kind of Southern California and the Twin Cities are kind of the two choral meccas, if you will, and Dale's out in LA for that. So let's talk a little bit about her Requiem. Like I said, it's really kind of, in my mind, an extension of the trajectory we're on, that Brahms, kind of away from a liturgical understanding. So this piece was commissioned by the Choral Arts Initiative in 2016. It's for SSAATTBB, unaccompanied choir, very virtuosic, and it splits even further at points. And she uses texts from 3 contemporary poets in order to explore how do we live knowing of our own mortality, meaning how do we live every day knowing that one day we're going to die. Now, this piece is 8 movements long. It's about 35 minutes total. And Trumbore doesn't order the movements. It's really up to the the conductor and the performers to decide what order makes the most sense. So it's kind of an interesting choose your own adventure, if you will. Now, Dale is the only composer who's alive today that I'm talking about. So I sent her an email and asked her to provide a little blurb about this piece. And she obliged, and it's one of the many, many things I love about the choral music field is that you can basically kind of cold call anybody, whether they're a composer or a conductor, and within a few days you get a very thoughtful response. And so it's a really nice thing. And she sends her greetings and thank you for being interested in her music. And this is what she said. She said, I knew after singing the Verdi Requiem as a freshman in college that I wanted to write my own Requiem someday. I also knew, though I wouldn't write this Requiem for another 10 years, that because I'm agnostic, I wanted to write a secular variation on the form, one that would be relevant and accessible to all listeners, regardless of their religious affiliation. Though How to Go On deviates in some ways from a traditional Requiem, it addresses similar themes: the winding path through coping with loss, an acceptance of our own mortality, and a contemplation of what happens after death. In preparing to write this piece, I spent 2 years collecting texts that spoke to the universality of grief. The poetry of Barbara Crooker, Amy Fleury, and Laura Foley addresses loss and heaviness, yes, but also finds moments of unexpected delight and even joy in times of upheaval. It's my hope that this piece will offer solace to anyone who has dealt with grief. And isn't that all of us? So it's a really interesting piece, and the movement that we would have listened to today is called Knowing the End. And the text is, how can we go on knowing the end of the story? So again, I'll send the playlist out soon so you can check this piece out. It's really a fine piece. Let's take a minute here and see. I don't think there's any other questions in the chat. So I'll just kind of do some concluding statements here. There are obviously many, many requiems that we couldn't get to to talk about tonight. So let me just kind of quickly go through this list that I made. The first one, Pierre Delarue, kind of a contemporary of Ockeghem, that first composer we talked about. So his music is similar, so that's why I didn't play it. But his piece is really also crucial to the development of the genre. The Victoria Requiem. Victoria, in my mind, is one of the most underrated composers. We're actually going to talk about him in a later session later on this semester. So stay tuned for that, because I think Victoria is really, really a talented composer. His Requiem is equally really a fine piece, but we just didn't have time to talk about it today. So check that one out as well. Dvorak, right? We all know his orchestral music primarily. I know CMS has performed some of his choral music, but a lot of people don't know that he wrote very, very nice things for choruses. And in that, his Requiem in B-flat minor, I think, is really fine. So that's another one, if you don't know that, to go listen to. The Duraflé Requiem is gorgeous. It's very hard. I've done it a couple times, and it's always hard, but it's really beautiful. So check that one out. Two 20th century ones here, the War Requiem by Benjamin Britten, and then the Ligeti Requiem. If you really want to stretch your ears, check that one out, because it gets pretty wild at times, but it's very good. Oh, I see. I'll throw this up here. Rick Birdsall says CMS did the Dvorak Requiem last year. Lots of flats. Yeah, 5 to be specific. I love it. And Don Newsom said, any chance we'll get to sing the modern Requiem someday? I'm open to it. It's pretty hard. You might want to listen to it first. Yeah, it's very difficult, but I've done a couple pieces by Trumbore and enjoy her music. All right, a couple things if you're interested in some outside reading for this class. Here's just a short little bibliography here. I don't produce this myself, or alone. I'm standing on the shoulders of many people. In particular, again, this Chet Alwis book, A History of Western Choral Music. There are 2 volumes. It's full of history and scores and biography. It's really an important contribution to scholarship. So if you're at all interested in choral music, I would recommend reading that. I mean, he's an encyclopedia himself, and so to have his kind of brain written down before you is really inspiring. Michael Eckert here wrote a pretty famous dissertation on the Ockeghem Requiem, and I drew on this for this presentation, but I also got to study with Dr. Eckert at the University of Iowa. I took 2 semesters of Renaissance counterpoint with him, which was quite challenging, but I learned a lot and really grew to appreciate this music of Ockeghem and composers of that ilk in a way that is sometimes hard, right? That music sounds so foreign to us today, but I think it's his class really inspired me, and his dissertation is great. So maybe I'll send him a little note that I talked up his dissertation, right? Finally, the Fauré Requiem, there are a couple different versions of it. There's a full symphony version and a chamber version and an organ version, and they didn't all come out at once, right? Fauré kind of edited his piece and rearranged it a couple times throughout his life. So if you're interested in reading more about that, John Rutter actually made an edition of the chamber version of the Fauré Requiem. That's the one I showed earlier here. And so if you're interested in his preface, he really goes through on this date he did this, on this date he did that. So you can get the full history of the Fauré Requiem from John Rutter himself. So again, I just want to end tonight by saying thank you. I apologize again for the technical difficulties. We're, to borrow a overused metaphor these days, we're building the airplane as we're flying it, right? So thank you for your patience. Thanks for sticking with it. I appreciate it. Next week, we are meeting on Tuesday. We will observe Labor Day here at CMS University. So on Tuesday, please join us for a 3-part, the first of a 3-part series on musicianship. And I'm going to be talking all about melody. And the focus will be practical tips for the choir singer. How can we look at melody and learn our music faster? Maybe see bigger pictures in the music rather than just a collection of notes? And how do we sight read better, right? Probably the scariest thing to all of us, it never goes away. No one likes sight reading, but what are some strategies that we can use to be more successful and, more importantly, feel more confident sight reading? Because I think it's important. So we'll talk about that next week, and then we'll talk about rhythm the following week, and then harmony the final week. So this 3-part series on musicianship, I'm really excited about. It'll be very different than these ones. We won't play any YouTube videos. It's going to be great. So please tune in for that. You can register using the Eventbrite link in the description below. If you're coming to this video after the fact, still feel free to comment, and I can see your comments and respond. We want you to be part of this community too. And then hopefully you'll register for one of the live streams and join us live on a Monday or Tuesday night. Please like, subscribe, share our videos. The more, the merrier. I think that's it. Oh, I should do a plug here for the donations, right? A lot of businesses and nonprofits' budgets have kind of out the window these days. And so CMS, like anybody, is looking to really make sure we're on solid ground. So a couple ways to donate here. If you want to do a recurring monthly donation, you can go to our Patreon page or buy me a coffee. You can also do a one-time donation on our website, chicagomastersingers.org. Again, all the links and descriptions are in the description of this video below. Now, last week we started our tradition of the moment of Zen at the end of rehearsal, and unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll be able to have that tonight. But I'll just give you a little teaser, and then I hope you can go listen to it once you get the playlist here. So tonight's moment of Zen was going to be Leah Garland by the great English composer Robert Purcell. Now Purcell later moved to Germany. He was a lawyer by trade, but he was an amateur composer, and he lived in the 19th and early 20th century, but really wrote kind of in an anachronistic madrigal style, a Renaissance style. And in this Leah Garland, you hear just a masterful command of suspensions and a control of dissonance that is very striking and kind of emotional. So I hope you can take a minute and listen to this piece. The performance I picked is by Voce 8, the octet from the UK, who I think just the purity and the emotion that they sing with is really a fabulous combination that can't be beat. Thank you very much again. I hope to see you next week, and have a good night.